I'm David Allen Greer for Errant Hashtag. Today's episode deals with gaps in understanding, how we misapprehend our very own field. It's going to begin with this cube. It's a little souvenir from my very first job, a job in which I was part of a team that was trying to commercialize the technology of the Iliac 4, one of the early large parallel processors. This cube is interesting because that technology has returned after a gap of about 20 years. People are taking an interest in it because it may be a way to increase processor speeds, to get our CPU industry back on a path where it is producing processors that are growing exponentially in speed. Yet at the same time, it's a reminder that we have looked at that class of processors before, that we have encountered certain kinds of problems, and that as we look at those problems, we are mostly approaching them with the same kind of tools. It's a reminder that sometimes we approach problems without knowing whether those problems are new or whether they are not, whether we are bringing truly innovative solutions or whether we are following back into old patterns. These gaps are prevalent in our field and represent the distance between what we think we know and what's actually happening. The other day I saw one of these gaps in an announcement by one of the major computing firms. They announced that their engineers had put more computing elements on a chip and were thereby keeping processors in line with the targets set by Moore's Law. Moore's Law is, of course, the industrial plan that has computing power growing exponentially. Well, this person went on and on about the benefits of Moore's Law and how we had seen computing power grow year by year, and never seemed to recognize that the industry has abandoned or at least modified those goals when they began to recognize that there were problems with heat dissipation. We first recognized these problems in 2004 with the Intel Prescott chip. If we were continuing to follow those targets, the original targets of Moore's Law, we would have laptop computers that dissipated as much heat as 8 home hairdryers. That would not be a machine that would be pleasant to use, and certainly not a machine pleasant to hold in one's lap. The essay that goes with this month's Errant Hashtag is a bit of a rant. It mocks how we currently characterize the idea of a failure of communication. It looks at the current term a disconnect, something that turns a negative problem into a positive problem. Instead of something missing, there's something that is blocking or interfering with our ability to understand each other. Now, at times, there is something blocking or interfering with our abilities to understand. However, if we start to probe at how we understand each other, how we communicate ideas, we begin to realize that problems are often caused by something missing. People are not sharing information. People have different visions for how a project should work. They have different fundamental underlying values. They have a different model about how the world works. Once you begin to peel back the layers and see the multiple issues that can interfere with how we understand our field and how we understand our progress, you begin to realize that we need to spend constant attention on these gaps of understanding, on how we grasp what is happening in our field. The idea of blocked communication, of that diabolical disconnect interfering with technical operations, was ever present in that very first project of mine. As we approached the end of it, as we began to realize that we were not going to be successful, we found disconnects everywhere. There was a disconnect between engineering and finance, we claimed. Another between finance and software. A third between software and marketing. And of course, there were dozens and dozens of disconnects between our supervisor and everybody on the project. When we finally got some distance with the project, we could see that, in fact, there were no disconnects. There were no blockages. We were all, in fact, dealing with a changing situation and processing lots of information. The environment that had created the Iliac 4 was drifting away. and new demands, demands that used uniform processors, standard operating systems. These were coming to the fore. We worked to understand this new environment as best we could and make decisions from it. We talked and we discussed and we debated. But just because people don't agree with your point of view doesn't mean that they aren't listening to your words. In a field as large and diverse as ours, we no longer have institutions that can make simple, unified decisions the way that IBM did in the 1950s or 60s, the way that Intel may have done in the 1980s. We do ourselves no favors when we mischaracterize our ability to understand our neighbor, or our neighbor's inability to understand us, or ultimately our two neighbors' inability to understand each other. The problems of communication are hard, and we should not turn a negative thing into a positive thing. We have to work hard to make sure that we share common information, common knowledge, common values and vision, even common assumptions. These things demand our constant attention for the good of us and for the good of our field. This is David Allen Greer. Take care.